The settlement of the marriage between Verity Lyle and Julian, 6th Duke of Ravensmere, was read aloud in the small library of Ravensmere Hall on a wet afternoon in April, in the year 1834. And it took Mr. Kroll, the family's attorney, 1 hour and 11 minutes to reach the clause that would undo every person seated in that room. Nobody troubled to listen to it. That was the whole of it, in the end. 6 people sat in a warm panelled room with the rain crawling down the tall windows and a clerk read out the disposition of houses, farms, timber, tithes, plate and pictures, and of the 6 people present only one was listening to the words as words. She was 23 years old. She was the bride, and she had been taught to listen by a man who had made his living out of other people's inattention. Her name was Verity Lyle. She sat very straight on a hard chair set a little apart from the others, in a gown of dove-grey silk with a plain white collar, her dark auburn hair parted in the middle and coiled low at the nape of her neck, her hands folded on a small closed writing case in her lap. She wore no jewels. She had one thin gold chain at her throat that had belonged to her mother. And she wore no ring beyond the plain gold one that had been on her hand for 11 days, since the quiet ceremony in London that had made her a duchess, and made the family that owned this room solvent for the first time in 2 generations. Her fortune was $80,000. It had come out of the rope walks at Bridport, out of hemp and tar and the patient buying up of other men's mortgages, and out of 31 years of a country attorney's practice conducted from a narrow office above a saddler's shop. Her father, Ambrose Lysel, sat beside her now in his plain black coat, with his spectacles pushed up into his grey hair, and he had the look of a man who has walked into a house where the furniture is finer than the manners. Across the hearth from them sat the Duke. Julian Ravensmere was 31, tall, black-haired, clean-shaven, with a jaw like the edge of a book and eyes of a dark, unreadable blue. He was, everybody agreed, one of the handsomest men in the west of England, and he had spent the 11 days of his marriage being courteous to his wife in the way a man is courteous to a stranger who has done him a great service in the street. He had not been unkind. He had simply not been present. He sat now, with his long legs crossed, and his gaze on the fire, and he did not look at his wife once during the reading of the settlement that governed the whole of her future. Beside him, in a chair drawn close to the fender, sat his sister. Lady Sybil Ravensmere was 28, tall and slim and glossy, with black hair dressed in ringlets, and a face that would have been beautiful if it had ever once been at rest. She had run Ravensmere Hall since she was 19. She had run her brother the household, the county's charities, and the family's reputation, and she had run them all through a period in which there had been no money whatsoever, which is a thing that takes more skill than anybody ever gave her credit for, and leaves more damage than anybody ever counted. She had chosen her brother's bride herself, in the sense that she had chosen the amount, and had then been obliged to accept the person attached to it. And in the window seat, half turned to the rain with a book she was not reading, sat Lady Georgiana Vane. She was 30, and a widow, and a cousin of the family at some distance nobody could ever quite state, and she had lived at Ravensmere for 4 years. She wore crimson that afternoon, a deep glowing crimson that took every scrap of firelight in the room and kept it. Until the previous November, it had been understood by everyone from the bishop down to the second gardener that Lady Georgiana Vane would be the next Duchess of Ravensmere. Then the full extent of the late Duke's debts had been privately established, and the understanding had quietly ceased to be understood, and a Bridport attorney's daughter with $80,000 had been found instead. Everyone in that room knew all of it. Nobody said any of it. What they said instead, over the course of that hour, was the thing they had been saying since Verity Lyle's trunks had come up the drive, which was that she was very ladylike, considering, and that her voice was really quite unmarked, and that it was a pity about the ropes. Mr. Kroll read on. He was 60, thin, dry, with a high black collar, and the particular contentment of a man who has served a great family so long that he has begun to believe the greatness is partly his own. He read the provisions for the Duke, and the provisions for the estate, and the trusts of the late Duchess's fortune, and at last he came to the provision for the wife. As to the jointure of her grace, he said, the family is not in a position at this present time to charge land. Ambrose Lyle put his spectacles down onto his nose. You are not in a position, he said, because my daughter's money is at this moment paying off the charges upon the land. When it is paid, you will be in a position. When it is paid, said Mr. Kroll, the land will be entailed to the heir, as it has been these 140 years, and cannot be charged for the benefit of a widow. Then charge the funds. The funds, said Mr. Kroll, will be exhausted. There was a small pause. Rain moved across the window in a long grey sheet. Let us be plain, said Ambrose Lyle. My daughter brings $80,000 into this house. What does this house settle upon my daughter? And it was Lady Sybil who answered him. Not the lawyer, not the Duke. She answered from her chair by the fire without turning her head, in the pleasant, carrying, faintly amused voice that had governed that house for 9 years, and she said, Give her St. Sain. Mr. Kroll's pen stopped. The chapel, my lady, the chapel. The burying ground and the glebe. What is it? 9 acres? 9 acres and 9 graves. Lady Sybil smiled into the fire, and the smile was for the room, and the room received it. It is the only thing on this estate that is neither entailed nor mortgaged, for the excellent reason that no living soul has ever wanted it. Let her have it. It will cost us nothing. It will look extremely handsome in the settlement, and here she did turn, and looked at Verity for the first time that afternoon, and her voice did not alter in the least, and it will give her somewhere to put her father's name. Lady Georgiana Vane laughed. It was a small laugh, quickly covered, but it was a laugh, and once it had happened the rest of the room allowed itself to relax into the joke. Mr. Kroll permitted himself a dry cough that was very nearly one. Even the clerk at the side table smiled down at his blotter. And the Duke of Ravensmere, who was not a cruel man, and who would spend a considerable part of the rest of his life paying for the next 4 seconds, looked at the fire and said nothing at all. Ambrose Lyle came up out of his chair. My lady, he began, in the voice he used in the county court at Dorchester, you will retract that. Father Verity had not raised her voice. She had not risen. She had put one hand on her father's sleeve, and that was all, and the old man stopped as though a rope had come taut. Sit down. Please. He sat down. Verity Lyle looked across the hearth at her sister-in-law. and there was no anger in her face that anybody in that room was able to read. Afterwards, when they all had leisure to think about it, several of them would remember that she had not flushed, and had not wept, and had not once looked at her husband. She had looked at Lady Sybil with the same steady grey attention she had been giving the settlement for an hour and 11 minutes, as though her sister-in-law had just that moment become a document. 9 acres and 9 graves, she said. May I ask 2 questions, Mr. Kroll? Of course, Your Grace. The title came out of the lawyer with a faint drag upon the way a man says a word in a foreign language he considers beneath him. Is the chapel of St. Sain consecrated ground? Mr. Kroll blinked. It is a private chapel of the family, Your Grace, standing in the old deer park, with its burying ground beside it. It has belonged to the family since the Abbey lands came to them. It is consecrated, certainly. It is also, I am bound to say, in a very indifferent state of repair. It is in a shocking state of repair, said Lady Sybil comfortably. The roof is half off it. There are jackdaws living in the bell-cote, and a yew tree came down across the north wall 4 winters ago. My father let it go, and my grandfather let it go before him. Nobody has been married or buried there in 19 years. Thank you, said Verity. My second question. In what estate is it to be conveyed to me? I beg your pardon? In what estate, she repeated, without impatience. You have spent an hour reading me the difference between an entail and a life interest, Mr. Kroll, so I know that you know it signifies. If the family gives me the chapel, does the family give me the chapel, or does the family give me the use of the chapel during my life? Mr. Kroll looked at Lady Sybil. Lady Sybil made a small movement of her hand, the movement of a woman waving away a wasp at a picnic. Oh, give it her outright, she said. Give it her in fee simple to her sole and separate use, and let there be an end of it. If we are to be generous, let us be generous where it does not signify. Write it so that nobody in this county can ever say the Ravensmeres bought a wife and gave her nothing. Her father may set up a monument in it if he pleases. He may set up a great many monuments. There is a good deal of room. And any reservation, my lady? Said the clerk from the side table, his pen poised. Right of way for the family? Right of use? Right of sepulture? And this was the moment. This was the 4 seconds. Afterwards, when the county was talking of nothing else at any dinner table for 100 miles, people would say that the whole thing had turned upon a clause, and they were right. But they were right in the wrong way, because it turned upon a clause that was never written at all. Reservation? Said Lady Sybil Ravensmere, and she laughed outright. Reserve what? Reserve the jackdaws? It is a ruin in a field, and it is hers, and I am sure I hope she may be very happy in it. Write it clean. Write it clean, said Mr. Kroll to his clerk. And the clerk wrote it clean. He wrote that there was conveyed and assured unto the said Verity, Duchess of Ravensmere, her heirs and assigns for ever, to her own sole and separate use, free from the control, debts and engagements of her husband, all that chapel of St. Sain standing in the old park of Ravensmere, together with the burying ground and churchyard thereunto adjoining, the bell-cote, the vestry, the chest, the registers, and all that close or parcel of glebe land, containing 9 acres or thereabouts, adjoining the same. He wrote it in a fine round hand, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on the 11th of April, 1834. He reserved nothing to the family. He reserved nothing to the Duke. He reserved nothing to the heirs of the body of the Duke, nor to the tenants, nor to the parish, nor to anybody living or unborn, because he had been told by the lady who governed that house that there was nothing there worth reserving. Verity's father read the clause twice, and then a third time, and then he looked at his daughter with an expression that nobody else in that room had the training to read. "Verity," he said quietly. "A word." "No, father," she said just as quietly. "I am content. You are not content. You have been insulted in my hearing. I have been given 9 acres, a bell, a chest and a chapel," said his daughter, "in fee simple, to my sole and separate use, free of my husband's debts, without one single reservation, on the 11th of April. She smiled at him, and it was the first time she had smiled since the reading began, and it was not a smile that anybody else in the room saw, because it was meant for her father alone, and it lasted about a quarter of a second. "Sign it." Ambrose Lyle looked into his daughter's face for a long moment. Then he sat back and folded his hands over his waistcoat and said, "Very well. Read it again, Mr. Kroll, read it slowly. I should like every word of that clause exactly as it stands." Mr. Kroll read it again, with the patient boredom of a man humoring a tradesman. Lady Sybil looked at the fire. Lady Georgiana turned a page of the book she was not reading. The Duke of Ravensmere watched the rain and thought about the 4,000 acres he would be able to free before Michaelmas, and about a woman in crimson in a window seat, and about how remarkably little his wife had said in 11 days. And under the window, a young woman in a dove-grey gown opened the small writing case in her lap, took out a pencil, and wrote 9 words on the inside of the cover where nobody could see them. Chapel, burying ground, glebe, no reservation, sole and separate use. It was the 11th of April, 1834. 14 months later, on the 24th of June in the year 1835, the grandest wedding that county had seen in 40 years would come down the lime avenue at Ravensmere in 9 carriages, with a marquis in the first of them and a bishop's chaplain in the second, and it would stop at a low iron gate in the wall of the old deer park, and it would stand there in the sunshine in front of 400 people, and it would not move, and it could not move, because the door beyond that gate was locked, and there was exactly one person alive who had the right to open it, and she had not yet been asked. Lady Sybil Ravensmere would ask her. Out loud. At the door. In front of every soul in the county. But that was 14 months away, and on the 11th of April, 1834, the rain was coming down on the deer park, and nobody at Ravensmere Hall gave a single thought to the small grey building standing in the wet grass under its failing roof, with the jackdaws going in and out of the bell-cote, and the 9 table tombs of the family lying in a row in the long grass beside it, and the yew down across the north wall exactly where it had fallen in the gale. And nobody had come. Nobody had come for 19 years. That, in the end, was what it cost them. Not the clause. The 19 years. Ravensmere Hall was a long grey house of the reign of Queen Anne, set at the end of a mile of limes, with a stone terrace running its whole south front, and an inner court behind it that had been an abbey cloister once, and was now the servants' yard. It had 91 rooms. 11 of them were in use. Verity learned that on her third morning, not from her husband and not from her sister-in-law, but from Mrs. Pettifer, the housekeeper, a small square woman of about 50 in a black stuff gown with a bunch of keys at her waist, who had been asked by the new Duchess whether she might see the whole house, and who had answered, after a small pause, that Her Grace might see the whole house if Her Grace did not mind the dust sheets and the buckets. They went through all of it together, that first week, the two of them alone with a lamp. The staterooms with their shutters closed for 11 years, the long gallery where the pictures had been taken down and stacked against the wall and covered because the damp came through the north end, the yellow bedroom where a bucket stood in the middle of the floor to catch what came through the ceiling, and beside it a second bucket, and beside that a china basin, all three of them arranged in a neat triangle, with the patience of a household that has stopped expecting anybody to mend the roof. When did the roof go, Mrs. Pettifer? The lead was sold in the year 29, Your Grace. The housekeeper said it without any expression whatever. Off the North Range. Her ladyship had it done in the winter when the family was in London, so there was nobody to see the carts go. And nobody has said so since. Nobody has said so since, Your Grace. Verity put her hand on the wall beside the window and felt the wet of it come through her glove. She said nothing to anybody at dinner that night. And Lady Sybil, watching her down the length of the table with the careful attention of a woman who has heard from 3 separate servants exactly where the new Duchess has spent her morning, could not tell whether she had understood what she had seen, which was, on the whole, the difficulty with Verity Ravensmere from the very beginning. She was not shy. She was not sullen. She simply did not spend anything she did not have to spend, and that included words. They had put her in the East Rooms. There was nothing in the arrangement that anybody could have objected to out loud, and that was the art of it. The East Rooms were perfectly handsome, with a fine plaster ceiling and 2 tall windows and a bed with blue hangings, and they were also the coldest rooms on that floor, being at the end of the passage above the old kitchen court, with a chimney that had not drawn properly since the reign of King George III. The Duchess's apartments, the proper ones, the ones with the southern light, and the little sitting room that looked down the Lime Avenue, had been Lady Georgiana Vane's for 4 years, and remained Lady Georgiana Vane's, because, as Lady Sybil explained pleasantly on the second evening, it would be so very awkward to turn poor Georgiana out when she had all her things about her, and dear Verity would not mind for a month or 2, would she, until the workmen could be got? Not in the least, said Verity. The workmen were never got. Verity had not for one instant supposed they would be. She lived in the East Rooms for 14 months, and she had a good fire built in the grate every morning by a housemaid named Hannah Trim, whom she paid out of her own separate money, and she wore a shawl indoors, and she never once mentioned it to her husband. Her husband in those first weeks was chiefly in the estate office with the agent and the mortgage papers, and after that he was chiefly in London. She did not blame him for it, exactly. She understood what he had married and why, better than he did, because she had read the schedules. She knew that the estate had been carrying charges of very nearly $200,000, that the interest alone had eaten 3/4 of the rents for 9 years, that his father had died leaving 11 separate creditors and one enormous unspoken shame, and that Julian Ravensmere had spent his 20s watching a thing he loved being taken apart in front of him, 1 field and 100 weight of lead at a time. A man who has been drowning for 9 years does not, in the first month of standing on the bank, turn round and thank the water. But he might have looked at her. That was the thing she permitted herself to feel. Once on a windy night in her cold room in the last week of April, with the candle guttering, and then folded up and put away like a letter she had decided not to send. He had been perfectly courteous. He had given her his arm into dinner every night. He had asked whether she was comfortable, and she had said that she was, and he had believed her. Because it is very restful to believe a woman who says she is comfortable. Not once had he asked her a question, the answer to which he did not already have. On the first day of May, 1834, a fine bright morning after 4 days of rain, the Duchess of Ravensmere put on stout boots and a plain brown walking dress, took an umbrella she did not need, and a small leather case she did, told nobody where she was going, and walked out across the park to look at her property. It was 1.5 miles. She went down past the stables and through the kitchen garden and out at the postern into the wet meadow, and then up the slope of the old deer park, where the ground rolls in long green waves and the hawthorns stand about in 2s and 3s, like people who have been waiting a long time for somebody to come back. It was the 1st of May, and the whole park was loud with birds. She came over the shoulder of the hill and stopped. The chapel of St. Seine stood below her at the bottom of a shallow green bowl, with a wall round it, and a black yew inside the wall, and it was small and grey and very old, and even from 400 yards away it was plainly dying. She stood and looked at it for a long while. The roof of the nave sagged in the middle like the back of an old horse. The bell cote at the west end still had its bell, which surprised her, a small dark shape hanging in the arch, and even at that distance she could see the jackdaws going in and out of the louvres in a black, flickering traffic. Half the churchyard wall was standing, and half of it was a long green heap, and across the north side of it lay the wreck of a great yew tree, its root plate up in the air taller than a man, its branches grown into the grass. The gate was an iron gate, and it was shut, and there was a chain on it. And in the grass beside the chapel, in a row, lay 9 great stone table tombs, each the size of a bed, each with a carved slab on 6 squat legs, and every one of them so deep in nettle and cow parsley, and long tangled grass, that from where she stood they looked like 9 grey boats half sunk in a green sea. Verity Ravensmere walked down the hill to the gate, and stood at it with her hand on the iron, and read the words cut into the arch above the door of the porch beyond, which were worn but still legible, and which she would afterward say she remembered for the rest of her life with the exact number of the birds that were singing. The door is opened from within. You'll not get in that way, mistress, said a voice behind her. Chains rusted into itself these 6 years, and the gate's not the way. She turned round. He was about 70, a broad old man gone stooped in the shoulders, in a brown smock coat and corduroy trousers and hobnailed boots, with white-side whiskers, and a face like a walnut, and a spade over one shoulder. He had come up the hollow way from the direction of the village without making any noise at all, in the manner of men who have spent their lives on grass, and he was looking at her with frank curiosity and no deference whatever, because he did not know who she was and would probably not have altered much if he had. Amos Broadmead, he said. Sexton was sexton. There's nothing to be sexton of. Verity Ravensmere, said Verity, and put out her hand. The old man looked at the hand, and then at her face, and then slowly took off his hat. "Ah," he said. "The new one. The new one. They said you was from Bridport." "I am from Bridport." "Ropes," said Amos Broadmead. "Ropes," Verity agreed. The old man put his hat back on. Something in his face had shifted, not warmed exactly, but settled, the way a man's face settles when a thing turns out to be simpler than he had been led to expect. "Well," he said, "you've come to look at it then. Everybody looks at it. Nobody comes inside it." He shifted the spade on his shoulder. "The way in is round the north, where the U's down. You can get over the wall there where she's fallen. Mind the nettles, they're waist high, and they've had 19 years of nobody. Have you a key?" Amos Broadmead stopped. He stood in the May sunshine with his spade on his shoulder and looked at the young woman in the brown walking dress for what she afterwards judged to be the better part of half a minute. "I have the key," he said at last. "I've had the key since the year 89, when I was a boy of 25 and old Kitto put it in my hand. There's been 3 dukes since. Not one of them has ever asked me for it." He said this without bitterness of any kind, as a man states the depth of a well. "It's in a box on my chimney shelf, wrapped in a bit of flannel, and I oil it twice a year, and I have no more right to it than the jackdaws have. Why do you want it, mistress?" And the Duchess of Ravensmere opened the small leather case she was carrying, and took out a folded paper with a green ribbon and a seal on it, and held it out to him. "Because it is mine," she said. "All of it. The chapel, the ground, the bell, the chest, the registers, and 9 acres. It was conveyed to me on the 11th of April. I have not come to look at it, Miss Broadmead. I have come to take possession of it." There was a silence in the green bowl of the park. Somewhere behind them a cuckoo was going on and on, 2 notes, without any hurry at all. "Read it to me," said Amos Broadmead. "I can't read." So the Duchess of Ravensmere stood at the locked gate of her own chapel on the 1st of May, and read the clause out loud to the sexton, slowly the whole of it, all the way to the words free from the control debts and engagements of her husband. And the old man listened with his head down and his hat in his 2 hands. And when she had finished, he stood for a moment, and then said 1 word, "Reservation?" Verity looked up sharply. "I beg your pardon?" "Reservation," said the old man. "That's the word, ain't it? That's the word they always put in. My father was hedger to the 3rd Duke, and he had a cottage with a reservation on it, and it meant the family kept the right to come in. I heard it read out over him when he died." He put his hat on again and looked at her steadily out of his small bright eyes. "Is there a reservation for the family in that paper, mistress?" "No," said Verity Ravensmere. "None?" "None," Amos Broadmead began, very slowly to smile. It was not a pleasant smile, and it was not an unpleasant one. It was the smile of a man watching a long piece of weather finally arrive. "Then they don't know," he said. "Know what, Mr. Broadmead?" And the old sexton looked past her. Down at the small grey building with its sagging roof, and its bell hanging in the arch, and its 9 drowned tombs. And he said, "What that place is for." He took her in that afternoon. They went round by the north, over the fallen wall where the U had come down, with Amos going first, and beating the nettles flat with the flat of his spade, and saying, "Mind ye, every 4 paces," and Verity gathering her skirt in 1 hand, and climbing the root plate of the U in her stout boots, without any assistance whatever, which the old man noticed, and did not comment upon. The porch door was oak, black with age, banded with iron. The key was 15 inches long and weighed rather more than a pound, and it turned in the lock with a sound like a bone setting. The door opened inwards as the arch had promised. Inside there was cold and green light and the smell of 19 years. She stood in the doorway and let her eyes make it out slowly. It was a small chapel, and a very fine one, 4 bays with round Norman arches on the north side and pointed ones on the south, where somebody had rebuilt after some medieval accident, and a low stone chancel arch at the east end, with a wooden screen still in it. The floor was flagged, and the flags were carpeted in fallen plaster and jackdaw sticks and the little dry bodies of 19 summers of flies. Half the roof was open to the sky, and through the gap the sunlight came down in a solid slant onto the chancel step, full of moving dust. 2 of the windows were out entirely, and the wind had come in and filled the pews with leaves. There was a swallow's nest on the sill of the east window. It should have been ruinous. That was the first thing she understood, standing there. It was not ruinous. It was neglected, which is a different thing, and a thing that can be undone. The walls were dry and standing, the arches were true, the tower and bell cote were sound, the screen was black oak and hard as iron. What had been let go was the roof and the glass and the ground and the care. 19 year, said Amos Broadmead from behind her, since the old Duke's mother was put in. There he pointed his spade at the chancel. They came out from the hall in the carriages and put her in, and went home again, and nobody has turned that key since. But me, twice a year, to see the water hadn't got at the chest. The chest, said Verity. In the vestry. It stood under the north wall of the vestry, an oak chest, 6 feet long, iron-bound, with 3 locks. 3 keys, said Amos. Parsons, wardens, families. Only there's been no parson here since the old Duke stopped the stipend, and no warden since my brother died, so he rummaged in the pocket of his smock and brought out on a ring 3 small keys, and looked at them with a kind of bleak amusement. So he opened all 3 locks, and lifted the lid, and stood back. Inside, wrapped each in oiled linen by somebody long dead who had cared, lay the registers of the chapel of St. Sain, 11 books, in leather and vellum, the oldest of them older than the house on the hill, running in an unbroken line from the year 1593, and lying flat beneath them all, sewn into a canvas cover, a great single sheet of parchment with 9 seals along its foot like a row of dark coins. Verity Ravensmere knelt down on the flags in her brown walking dress and lifted it out with both hands. It took her about 4 minutes to read the first side of it. She was, after all, an attorney's daughter, and she had been copying deeds for her father since she was 11 years old. And she knew the hand, and she knew the Latin tags, and she knew, above all, how to find the operative words in a thicket, because her father had taught her that the whole art of it is knowing which sentence in a document is the sentence that does something. She read it once. Then she sat back on her heels on the cold floor, with the parchment across her knees, in a slant of dusty sunlight, in the middle of 19 years of leaves, and she said out loud to nobody at all, "Oh, mistress?" said Amos Broadmead. The Duchess of Ravensmere did not answer him at once. She was looking at the 9 seals along the bottom of the sheet, and she was doing, behind her grey eyes, a piece of arithmetic that involved a date, a trust, a marriage that the whole county had been talking about since Christmas, and the word reservation. Mr. Broadmead, she said at last, and her voice was perfectly level. How many table tombs are there in the churchyard? 9, mistress. And is there room for a 10th? There is room, said the old man, for 100. Good, said Verity Ravensmere, and got up off the floor and shook out her skirt and put the parchment back in the chest with her own hands and shut the lid and locked all 3 locks and put the ring of keys in her pocket. Then we shall need a roofer, a glazier, a mason, and about 400 yards of new wall. And Mr. Broadmead, mistress, you are sexton again from this morning. $22 a year and the cottage rent free, paid out of my own money, not the estate's, and you will take it from my hand and from no one else's. She looked at him, and you will say nothing whatever about this to anybody at the Hall. Emmis Broadmead took off his hat for the 2nd time that day. Mistress, he said, there is nobody at the Hall who has ever once asked me anything. The parchment with the 9 seals was called at its head the Ordinance of the House of Ravensmere touching the chapel of St. Sain, and it had been made in the year 1698, in the time of the 2nd Duke, at the end of a long and bitter quarrel between 2 branches of the family, over which of them was entitled to be called the elder. Verity had read enough of her father's cases to know exactly what she was looking at. It was a peace treaty. 2 sets of cousins who had spent 11 years and a great deal of money at law had come to an agreement, and, having no faith at all in one another's word, had done what men in that century did. They had bound the whole line, forever, to a place. The operative words were on the 2nd side, in the 11th line, and they said that from that day forward no son or daughter of the house of Ravensmere should be married, and no head of the house should be buried, save at the chapel of St. Sain in the old park, after the usage of the house, and that any marriage or burial of the family solemnized elsewhere should be taken among them as a private act only, and should carry with it no portion, no charge upon the estate, and no place in the family's own register. And then, in the 12th and 13th lines, came the thing that Verity Ravensmere read 4 times, kneeling on a cold flagged floor in a slant of dusty light, with her heart going hard and slow. The usage of the house was set out. It was short. It was very old, and it was very deliberate, and it had been written by men who had just spent 11 years discovering exactly how much their cousins could be trusted. The party to be married should come to the chapel door. The owner of the chapel should stand within. The leave to enter and to use the chapel should be asked aloud at the door, before witnesses, by the party seeking it, and should be given, aloud, at the door, before witnesses, by the owner, and the giving of it should be written into the register of the chapel in the owner's own hand, and the entry so made should be the proof and the record of the thing, and no other proof should serve. The door is opened from within. It was not a piece of piety cut over an arch. It was a clause of a treaty, cut in stone so that nobody could burn it. Verity sat back on her heels. She thought about a warm panelled library on the 11th of April, and a woman in a chair by the fire waving away a wasp, and a clerk's pen poised over a page, asking whether there should be any reservation for the family. Reserve what? Reserve the jackdaws? And she thought, with the strange cold clarity that comes to some people at the exact moment their life changes direction, about a conversation she had heard through a half-open door at Ravensmere 3 evenings after her arrival, in which Lady Sybil Ravensmere had told Lady Georgiana Vane, in the pleasant, carrying voice that the Marquis of Ardennes would come to the point before the summer was out, and that his people were being tiresome about the portion, and that the whole thing turned upon her mother's trust, which was $90,000 and which she should have on her marriage, and which the Ardennes lawyers wanted seen and sworn and settled before any articles were signed at all. Her mother's trust, the late Duchess of Ravensmere's marriage trust for her daughter. Verity had read that trust. It was in the settlement bundle. It had been read out in her hearing at 1:30 on the 11th of April, in the driest voice in Dorset, while 5 people in a warm room thought about something else. She could see the page. She could see the phrase, because it had struck her at the time as an odd, old-fashioned, pious sort of phrase, and she had wondered mildly what it meant. And then Mr. Croll had turned the page. To be paid unto my daughter upon her marriage solemnized in the chapel of St. Seine after the usage of the house, and upon the certificate of the entry thereof in the register of the said chapel, and not otherwise. And not otherwise. The Duchess of Ravensmere knelt on the floor of her own chapel for a long time. Then she stood up, and put the parchment away, and locked the chest, and walked back over the hill to the hall in time to dress for dinner, and she said nothing at all. She tried twice. That is a fact, and it matters, and there were witnesses to both attempts, and afterwards both of them remembered it perfectly well, which is why the county's opinion turned as fast and as hard as it did. The first attempt was on the 9th of May, at dinner, when Lady Sybil was describing to the table the Church of St. George in London and its incomparable advantages for a wedding of any consequence, and the flowers, and the awning, and the 15 carriages, and Verity Ravensmere put down her fork and said, into a gap in the talk, Sybil, has anybody looked into the trusts of your mother's settlement? The gap in the talk became a different sort of gap. I beg your pardon, said Lady Sybil. Your portion. The 90,000. Has Mr. Croll read the trust lately, or is he going upon memory? Because there is a condition in it as to place, and I think it is a hard one. There was a silence of about 3 seconds, and then Lady Sybil Ravensmere laughed, and the laugh went down the table and picked up Lady Georgiana on the way, and by the time it reached the far end where the Duke sat it had become a general and comfortable thing. My dear Verity, said Lady Sybil, you are very good. But I do beg you will not do this. Your father is an attorney, and I am sure it is very natural to you, but there are people whose business this is, and it is not becoming in a woman in your position to be forever. And she made a small gesture with 2 fingers, a leafing gesture, a gesture of a person going through papers, to be forever at the documents. It looks so exceedingly like counting. It is counting, said Verity. That is what it is for. Then let Mr. Croll count. He has counted for this family for 30 years. Mr. Croll did not read the reservation clause of my own conveyance a month ago, said Verity, and he wrote it. The temperature at that table dropped 11 degrees in 1 second, and the Duke of Ravensmere looked up from his plate for the first time in the whole exchange and looked at his wife, and there was in his face something that was not annoyance, and that Verity, who was not looking at him, did not see. That will do, said Lady Sybil, pleasantly, finally, in the voice that had ended 9 years of arguments in that house. We do not discuss the settlement at table. The second attempt was 5 days later. and it was made privately, and to the right person, and it failed worse. She asked Mr. Kroll for 10 minutes in the estate office. She had the trust wording written out on a half sheet in her own hand. She put it in front of him and asked him one question: whether the words after the usage of the house had ever been construed, and by whom, and whether he had satisfied himself as to what the usage of the house actually was. Mr. Kroll read the half sheet. Then he folded it in two and gave it back to her, and looked at her over his spectacles with 60 years of a certain kind of comfort in his face, and said, "Your Grace, the phrase is a form of words. Old settlements are full of them. It means, in plain English, married as the family has always married. Her ladyship will be married from this house, with her brother's consent, by a clergyman, in orders, in the presence of the county. That is the usage of the house." "And the chapel?" "The chapel," said Mr. Kroll, "is a ruin in a field, ma'am. It has no roof, no glass, no incumbent, and no license. No trustee alive would insist upon it. No court in England would let a young lady's $90,000 fail for a heap of stones with jackdaws in it." He permitted himself a small smile, of the same family as the cough, on the 11th of April. "And I confess I did not look for you to be so anxious about it, when it is your own property that stands in the way, and when it might be thought that you had something to gain by the difficulty." Verity Ravensmere looked at the old man for a moment. "Thank you, Miss Kroll," she said. "That is what I wanted to know." And she went out, and she never raised it again with any member of that family, or with their lawyer for 13 months. That night she wrote to her father, and the letter she wrote and the letter she got back are both in the muniment room at Ravensmere to this day, in a green box, and they are the whole of the case. She set the thing out for him as she would have set out a brief, the ordinance and its date, the 9 seals, the 11th and 12th and 13th lines, the trust and its condition, the marriage projected for the following June, the state of the chapel, the state of the roof, the fact that she owned every stone of it without one word of reservation, and the fact that she had twice tried to say so and had twice been laughed at. Then she asked him 3 questions. Is the ordinance good? Is the trust condition good? And what ought I to do? Ambrose Lyall's answer came back from Bridport in 6 days, and it was 4 pages long, and the first 3 pages were law. The ordinance was good. It did not bind any stranger. It bound only the family, and the family had been executing it for 136 years, and there were 9 seals on it, and 11 registers behind it, and no court would look at that and call it a form of words. The trust condition was good, and it was worse than good. It was drawn tight, not merely solemnized in the chapel, but after the usage of the house, and upon the certificate of the entry, and not otherwise. The trustees were 2, an old cousin at Bath and a bank, and trustees, her father wrote, are the most frightened animals in England, and no trustee living will pay out $90,000 against a condition he can read with his own eyes and see unperformed. The 4th page was not law. "My dear child," wrote Ambrose Lyall, "you will now ask me whether you should go into that drawing-room tonight and tell them. I am going to answer you, and then I am going to trust you to be cleverer than I am, because you always have been. Do not tell them. Not from spite. I have never in my life advised a client to keep a thing back from spite, and I will not begin with my own daughter. Tell them tonight, and I will tell you exactly what happens, because I have watched it happen 40 times in 31 years. They will not thank you. They will not admire you. They will be frightened. And frightened people do not repair the injury. They remove the person who showed it to them. Within a fortnight, there will be a proposal to buy the chapel back from you at some handsome figure. When you decline, there will be a second proposal, put more warmly, that you should convey it to trustees for the family, since after all it can be nothing to you. When you decline that, your husband will be brought to you, and he will be made to ask. And he will ask badly, because a man asked to press his own wife will do it clumsily, and you will either give it up and be nothing in that house for the next 40 years, or you will refuse him, and they will have what they most want, which is the right to say that you are a hard woman who came out of trade and took her revenge on a family in mourning for its own kindness. They have already written that story, my dear. They wrote it on the 11th of April. All you can do is decide what part they get to hand you when the curtain goes up. So do not tell them. Do something better. Mend it. Mend the roof, mend the glass, mend the wall, mend the ground, mend the registers, keep every bill and receipt, and have every single thing done in your own name and paid out of your own separate money, so that the account of it is unanswerable. Enroll your conveyance at the county registry so that it is a public record and cannot be mislaid by anybody's clerk. Get the diocesan registrar to certify the consecration, and get a proper faculty for the works, so that when the day comes there is a license and a table and a clergyman, and nothing in the world to object to. Copy out the old registers into a fair new book while the old ones are still legible, and sign the copy and have it attested. And then, my dear, when they come to you at the last minute, as they will, in a hurry and in a fright, and when they discover in front of the whole county that the one thing their name has stood upon for 136 years belongs absolutely to the woman they laughed at, you will not be standing there with a grievance and a locked door. You will be standing there with the door open, and the bell ringing, and the flowers out, and the register on the table, and a pen in your hand. That is not revenge. Revenge is cheap, and it does not last the winter. That is something else, and I do not know a name for it. But I have seen it twice in my life, and both times it changed everybody in the room. Your affectionate father, A. Liesel. P.S. Your mother had a saying about people who are given something worthless. She said, "They have not given you a small thing. They have shown you where they are not looking." Verity read the letter 3 times in the cold east room, with her shawl about her shoulders, and then she sat down at the little writing table by the window and did 4 things. She wrote to the county registry at Dorchester to enroll the conveyance of the 11th of April. She wrote to the diocesan registrar at Salisbury for a certificate of the consecration of the chapel of St. Seine, and for the form of application for a faculty for repairs. She wrote to a firm of lead workers at Exeter. And she wrote, in the little account book she had kept since she was 15, at the top of a clean page, in a small round hand, St. Seine, and under it bell, roof, glass, wall, ground, books. It was the 15th of May, 1834. She had 13 months and 9 days. She did not know that then, of course. The wedding was not fixed until the autumn. She simply began, the way people who mean it begin, which is on a Tuesday, with a list and no audience. The first man she hired was Isaac Rowe, mason, of Ravensmere village, aged 44, who had not had 11 weeks continuous work in 11 years, because the great house had stopped building anything in the year 26, and the parish had gone quietly to sleep behind it. She walked down to the village herself and knocked at his door, which caused a degree of consternation in that street that took about 9 years to die down entirely. She sat in his kitchen with his wife and his 4 children looking at her from the stairs, and she drank a cup of tea that was almost entirely milk. And she asked him what it would cost to rebuild 400 yards of churchyard wall in the old way, with the stone that was lying there already, and what it would cost to reset 9 table tombs that had gone over, and how many men he would want, and how long the frost would allow him. Isaac Rowe, who had been expecting a request for a subscription to something, gave her figures. Verity wrote them in her book. Then she asked him a second question, which was the question that made the village hers before the leaves were off the trees. Who else is out of work in this parish, Mr. Rowe? Names, please, and what each of them can do. There were 19 names. She took 11 of them that first summer, and the other 8 before Christmas. The lead came from Exeter in the 2nd week of June on 4 wagons, and the whole village came out to see it go by, because lead going towards Ravensmere instead of away from it was, as the blacksmith said in the hearing of 3 people who repeated it, a thing his father had never seen. Ned Chubb, carpenter, and his brother, and 4 young men who had never worked above 10 feet in their lives, took the sagging roof off the nave in 11 days under the direction of a Bridport roofer, whom Ambrose Lyle sent down at his own charge and afterwards refused to be paid for. The old timbers came out, and 11 of them proved sound enough to go back. The rest were oak from the Ravensmere estate, bought and paid for at the market price out of the Duchess's separate money, with a receipt, because her father had written keep every bill and receipt, and she kept every bill and receipt. The glass took longer. 2 windows were out entirely, and 4 more were half gone, and the glazier who came from Exeter to look at them, a stooped elderly man named Mallow with an eyeglass on a string, spent 2 hours in the chancel, and then came out into the churchyard, where Verity was standing among the nettles with her notebook, and said, in the tone of a man who has found something, and has decided that it is safe to, "Say so, ma'am. Who told you this glass was worth nothing?" "Everybody who has ever mentioned it to me." "Then everybody who has ever mentioned it to you has never stood under it at 4 in the afternoon. He jerked his thumb back at the building. "The east window's 15th century, ma'am, near all of it. And it is not touched, because nobody ever cared enough about this place to improve it. There's 411 pieces of medieval glass in that frame, and the only thing wrong with them is 19 years of jackdaw filth and a slipped saddle bar. I have not seen its equal outside a cathedral in 30 years of this trade." Verity Ravensmere looked up at the black hole of the east window with its swallow's nest and its film of filth. "Then clean it, Miss Mallow," she said. "Do not improve it. Clean it, and lead it, and do not let one boy near it who has not done it before." The chapel of St. Sain got its roof in August, its bell rehung in September, its churchyard wall in the autumn and the spring, and its east window in the March following, and by the time it was finished, the parish of Ravensmere had had 491 days of paid work, put into it by a woman who lived a mile and a half away in the coldest room in a house with 91 rooms. The men were paid every Saturday at noon in the porch out of a japanned box, by the Duchess herself in coin, with the amount and the name written in a ruled book that she signed at the foot of every page. She never once sent the money down with a servant. Amos Broadmead said afterwards that in 14 months she missed one Saturday, in February, when the snow was over the hedges, and that she came on the Monday and paid them for the Saturday anyway and would not hear a word about it. At the hall they thought she was mad, and then they thought she was tiresome, and then they thought she was a joke, and by the following spring, when it began to be repeated at other people's dinner tables, they thought she was an embarrassment, which is a great deal worse. The Duchess's ruin, Lady Georgiana Vane called it. It was a small phrase and a good one, and it travelled. Have you seen the Duchess's ruin? She is at it every day, in all weathers, with a notebook. And then, with the particular smiling gentleness that Lady Georgiana had raised to an art, I do think it is charming. She must have something, poor creature, and one cannot be forever in the drawing room when one has nothing to say in it. Lady Sybil's method was different, and better and worse. Lady Sybil asked after it, every evening, in front of whoever was staying in the house. And how does the chapel go on, Verity? Are we roofed? Do tell us about the lead. Verity has bought lead, Lady Marchbank, a great deal of lead, from Exeter. She takes such an interest. It is quite her hobby. And then the turn of the head, and the pleasant voice going a half tone down. Though I confess I do not perfectly see the object of putting a new roof upon a building that nobody will ever go into. But then I have no head for business, and Verity has such an excellent one. It is quite the family joke that we shall none of us be allowed to die until she has somewhere handsome to put us. The laughter went round every time, every single time, and every single time Verity Ravensmere said something short and mild about the weather delaying the mason, and passed the dish and let it go by. She let it go by for 11 months. People have asked since how she did that. Her own answer, given years later to a young woman in a similar case, was not the answer anybody expects. I did not bear it patiently, she said. I want that understood. I was not patient, and I was not meek, and I did not forgive them at the time, and anybody who tells a young woman she must feel kindly while she is being laughed at every night for a year is talking nonsense and doing harm. I was angry all the way through. What I did was decline to spend it. Anger is money, my dear. You may spend it at the table for the pleasure of 5 seconds, and then it is gone and you have nothing but a reputation for scenes, or you may take it out to a cold building on a hill and put it into a roof. It is the same anger. It buys quite different things. Her husband was in London from October to February. He came back 3 times in that stretch, and on the 3rd occasion, in the middle of December, he rode out across the park in a hard frost and pulled up on the shoulder of the hill above the Green Bull, because there was smoke coming up out of the trees where there had never been smoke. Below him, in the frozen grass, the chapel of St. Sain stood with a new roof on it. He sat his horse for a long time. There was scaffolding still at the west end, and a stack of dressed stone under sacking, and a brazier burning in the churchyard with 4 men round it eating their dinner, and the wall on the north side was rebuilt for 150 yards in clean new work that stopped dead in the middle of a run where the frost had caught them. The fallen yew was gone. Where its root plate had been there was a made-up bank of earth turfed. The 9 table tombs stood clear of nettles in a line, level, scrubbed, their carved slabs showing pale in the winter light for the first time in a generation. And a woman in a grey cloak was standing at the far end of the row with a notebook, copying something off the ninth of them, with an old man holding a lantern for her because the afternoon was going. Julian Ravensmere sat on the hill above his own park and looked down at his wife. He had at that moment 111 days of married life behind him, and no idea whatever what she was doing. He knew that she had been given the chapel. He remembered, in a general way, that it had been a thing said at the settlement, and that his sister had said it, and that he had not liked the way it had been said, and he remembered that he had not spoken, and that memory had begun, somewhere in the autumn, to have a small edge on it that turned up at odd hours. He rode down, she heard the horse, and turned round, and stood waiting for him with the notebook still open in her hands, and the old man with the lantern took 2 paces back and became invisible in the way that servants of that generation could. "Verity, your grace, you have a new roof. I have. Who is paying for it?" The question came out flatter than he meant it. He heard it come out. He saw her face take it in, and file it, and answer it, all in about a second and a half, without the smallest change of expression. "I am," she said. "Out of my separate money, which is my father's, not yours. The estate is not charged a penny and never will be. Every bill is receipted, and the book is at your service in the estate office whenever you care to see it. Nothing here touches the entail, the mortgage, or your credit. That was not what I meant. It is what you asked." There was a silence. The 4 men at the brazier had stopped eating. "It was not what I meant," said the Duke of Ravensmere again more quietly, and then, because he was 31 years old and had spent 9 years learning to say only the things that could not be used against him, he found he could not get to the second sentence at all. He looked past her at the row of scrubbed tombs. "The stones are clean. They were under 3 feet of nettle. There is a child buried in the 4th one who was 11 months old. Nobody had read her name aloud since the year 1792, so we read it aloud on Tuesday, Miss Day, Broadmead and I. Her name was Anne." Verity closed the notebook. "It is your family, your grace. I did not think you would object to it being tidy. I do not object." He said it too fast. "Verity, I do not object to any of it. I find I am glad of it." And then, in a voice she had not heard from him before, "Are you very cold in those rooms?" She looked up at him. For about 4 seconds, there was a thing standing between them in the frozen grass that could have gone either way, and both of them knew it, and afterwards each of them would think of those 4 seconds a great many times. "Yes," said Verity Ravensmere, "but I am used to it, and the fire draws better, since Hannah found the swift's nest in the chimney. You will be late for dinner, your grace, and your sister does not like the fish kept back." And she opened her notebook again, and turned to the 9th tomb, and the Duke of Ravensmere sat looking at the top of her bent head for a moment, and then turned his horse and rode back up the hill. He gave her, that Christmas, a set of garnets out of the family's box, a necklace and a pair of long earrings in old gold, which the jeweller's ticket said had come into the house in the year 1781. She wore them on Christmas Day, and they were remarked upon, and Lady Sybil said how well they looked, and how odd it was the garnets should suit a person who had no colour, and Lady Georgiana said nothing at all, and looked at them for rather a long time. 2 days later, Verity sold them, privately through her father, for $430, and put the whole of it into the east window, and never told anybody living except Amos Broadmead, who was standing beside her when Mallow's bill came, and who could not read it. Is it a great deal, mistress? It is a pair of earrings and a necklace. The old man thought about that. Which will last longer? He asked, the window or the earrings? The window, said the Duchess of Ravensmere, will still be there when there is nobody left alive who has ever heard of me. Then that's what earrings are for, said Amos Broadmead, and spat on his hands and went back to work. The engagement of Lady Sybil Ravensmere to Edmund, Marquess of Ardennes, was announced formally on the 11th of January, 1835, and the marriage was fixed for the 24th of June, and the arrangements were begun on a scale that the county had not seen since the coronation. It was to be at the parish church of St. Mary, at Ravensmere, at 11 in the morning, with 400 invited and the whole parish besides. An awning from the churchyard gate, 9 carriages, the bishop's chaplain, a breakfast for 160 in the long gallery, which was to be repaired and repainted for the purpose at a cost that Verity, who saw the estimate lying open on the estate office table, read twice and did not comment upon. Nobody at any point in those 5 months of planning mentioned the chapel of St. Seine, or the ordinance, or the trust, or the words after the usage of the house. And 1.5 miles away, in a small grey building with a new roof and a clean east window and 400 yards of standing wall, a woman was copying out 11 registers into one fair new book, at a rate of about 11 pages a week, in a small round hand, by the light of the north windows, from the year 1593 forwards. She reached the year 1781 on the 3rd of April, 1835, and she found the entry, and she sat back very slowly in her chair, and she said out loud, in the empty chapel, exactly what she had said on the floor with the parchment across her knees 11 months before. Oh, the entry was on the 9th page of the 6th register, and it was dated the 14th of September, 1781, and it was in a woman's hand. Charles Lord Ravensmere, eldest son of the 3rd Duke, had been married in the chapel of St. Seine on that day to Mary Halse, daughter of Josiah Halse, sailcloth maker, of Lyme Regis. Beneath the marriage, in the same hand, was written the thing that made Verity Ravensmere sit back in her chair in an empty chapel on a bright April afternoon. Memorandum: leave to enter this chapel, and to use the same was asked at the door, aloud by the said Charles Lord Ravensmere before these witnesses, and was given at the door aloud by me, Mary Halse, owner of this chapel, the burying ground, and the glebe, by settlement made upon my marriage this day, and I have entered the same with my own hand, as the usage of this house requires. M. Halse. And then, in smaller letters, squeezed into the foot of the page, plainly written later, with a different ink and a worse pen and no witness at all, note by me, Mary Ravensmere. This chapel was given to me at my marriage because it was thought worth nothing, and because I came out of a sail loft, and I was told so at the table by his sister in the hearing of 11 persons. I have mended the roof of it. To her that comes after me and is given nothing, mend it. It is the only part of this house that cannot be sold, and it is the part they will one day need. Verity sat for a long while, with her hands flat on either side of the book. Then she got up and went out through the porch and down the row of table tombs to the 9th one, the one at the end, the one nearest the wall whose slab she had copied in December in the frost with an old man holding a lantern for her, and she knelt down in the grass and read it again, although she knew it by heart. Mary, Duchess of Ravensmere, daughter of Josiah Hulse of Lyme, wife of Charles, 4th Duke. She mended this place, died the 3rd of February, 1815, in her 72nd year. 19 years. Nobody buried at St. Seine for 19 years. Mary Hulse was the last person the family had brought out to that green bowl, and they had brought her in a carriage and put her in the ground and gone home, and stopped, and forgotten what the place was and why it belonged to whom it belonged in one single generation. Because a thing is only remembered as long as somebody is made to say it out loud at a door in front of witnesses. And she had been the great-grandmother of Julian Ravensmere. And her garnets, which had come into the house in the year 1781, were at that moment glazed into the east window of her own chapel 40 feet, from where her great-grandson's wife was kneeling in the grass. Verity Ravensmere put her forehead down on the edge of the cold stone slab, and stayed like that for some minutes. It was the only time in 14 months that Amos Broadmead, who was up at the gate, and who had the sense of a hedge and the discretion of a stone, saw her cry, and he turned round and looked hard at the sky, and told nobody for 11 years. The trustee's letter reached Mr. Croll on the 19th of May. It was 5 weeks and 2 days before the wedding. The long gallery was full of painters. There were 1,100 forced roses coming from a nursery at Bath. The awning had been ordered, the bishop's chaplain had accepted, and Lady Sybil Ravensmere had that morning approved the 4th and final version of a seating plan for 160 people, which is a document that takes more out of a woman than anybody who has not done it can be made to understand. The letter was from Mr. Fortescue, of Bath, aged 81, surviving trustee of the marriage settlement of the late Duchess of Ravensmere, and from the bank that was trustee with him, and it was 4 lines long, and the operative sentence was this: that the trustees would not and could not pay the portion of $90,000 save upon production of a certificate of the entry in the register of the chapel of St. Seine, the condition being express, and not otherwise. Mr. Croll read it in the estate office at 9 in the morning, and did not go in to breakfast. He read it 4 times. Then he sent a boy for the settlement bundle, and read the trust, and then he sat for a while looking out of the window at the stable clock, and it is only fair to him to record that at some point in that half hour the old man understood entirely what he had done, and that it took him another 11 minutes to be able to stand up. Because Mr. Croll had drawn the conveyance. Mr. Croll had told his clerk to write it clean. Mr. Croll had assured a duchess in this very room 13 months before, with a small smile, that the phrase was a form of words. He went to Lady Sybil first. That was his second mistake of the year, and it was very nearly as expensive as the first. What happened between 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock on the 19th of May, 1835, in the small library at Ravensmere Hall, was heard in part by 2 footmen, a housemaid on the back stairs, and Mrs. Pettifer, who happened to be in the passage for the whole of it, and who, when she was afterwards asked, said only that her ladyship had been very much distressed, which was a piece of loyalty that cost her something, and was noticed. The plain facts came out to the servants' hall within the hour, and to the village by the following evening, in the way such things do. And they were these: that Lady Sile had said it could not be so, and had been shown that it was so, that she had said the chapel was the family's, and had been shown in Mr. Croll's own hand on the 11th of April of the year before that it was not, that she had said, then let it be bought back, and had been told that it could be bought back only if the owner chose to sell. That she had said, she will sell, she must sell, what can it possibly be to her? And had then been quiet for rather a long time, and that at about 12:30 she had said, in a voice the housemaid on the stairs described as not like her ladyship at all, one short sentence, which was, "What did I say to her?" And that Mr. Croll had not answered. The offers came in exactly the order Ambrose Lyle had written out in Bridport 13 months before, and they came so exactly in that order that Verity, taking them one by one in her cold east room, had the strange sensation of watching a play whose lines she had read in advance. The first came that same evening. From Mr. Croll, formally, in writing on behalf of the family, an offer of $20,000 for the immediate reconveyance of the chapel, the burying ground and the glebe, together with the family's warm sense of her Grace's exertions in the repair of the same. She wrote back in 4 lines. She thanked him. She declined. She observed that the estate had not $20,000 that was not her father's already, and that she would not be paid her own dowry back for a building she had roofed at her own charge. The second came the next morning from Lady Georgiana Vane, who came to the East Room in person for the first time in 14 months, in a morning gown of dove grey, having thought about it carefully, and who sat down and was very kind for 11 minutes. It was not a question of money, she said. It was a question of what was suitable. A private chapel in a great park was not a personal thing. It belonged to the name. It had merely happened, through an oversight in a hurried settlement, to be put into one person's hands. If dear Verity would simply convey it to trustees for the family, everything would go on as before, and nobody need ever be embarrassed, and the whole unfortunate business could be forgotten by everybody. "Including me?" said Verity. Lady Georgiana Vane smiled, and said that she was sure nobody wished dear Verity to forget anything. "That is a pity," said Verity, "because I have written it all down." The third came on the 22nd of May, at 11 o'clock at night, and the third was her husband. He knocked. That was the first thing. In 14 months he had never once come to that room, and when he did come he knocked, and waited, and was led in by Hannah Trim, who went out and shut the door and stood in the passage with her hands folded, because she had been born in the village, and had 4 brothers on the chapel wages, and she was not going anywhere. The Duke of Ravensmere stood in the middle of his wife's cold sitting room, with his hat in his hand, and looked at the fire, which was small, and at the bucket in the corner that caught the leak, which he had not known about, and at the plain deal table by the window with its neat piles of receipted bills, and at the shawl over the back of the chair, and at his wife, who had risen, and was standing quite still with her hands at her sides. "They have sent me to ask you," he said. "I know. Croll has written out what I am to say. I have it in my pocket." He did not take it out. It runs to 2 sides. There is a paragraph about your duty to the name you have taken, and a paragraph about my sister's happiness, and a paragraph, Verity, about the impropriety of a wife holding property in a manner which embarrasses her husband. Verity Ravensmere said nothing at all. "May I ask you one question before I begin?" "You may ask me anything, Your Grace," You always might have." He flinched at that. She saw it and was not sorry. "On the 11th of April last year," said Julian Ravensmere, in the small library. "What was said to you?" He stopped. "I was there. I heard it. I have heard it, I find, a very great many times since, generally at about 4 in the morning. I want you to say it to me out loud, and then I will decide whether I am going to read Kroll's paper." There was a long silence in the cold room. "She said," said Verity, "give her Saint Sain 9 acres and 9 graves. It will cost us nothing, and it will give her somewhere to put her father's name." Lady Georgiana laughed. "Mr." Kroll coughed. "The clerk asked whether there was to be any reservation for the family, and your sister said, 'Reserve what? Reserve the jackdaws. It is a ruin in a field. Write it clean.'" She held his eyes. "And you looked at the fire, your grace, and you said nothing. And my father stood up to defend me, and I had to put my hand on his sleeve and make him sit down. Because I was 2 weeks married, and I had already worked out that in this house the only person who would ever be blamed for a scene was me." The Duke of Ravensmere took Mr. Kroll's paper out of his pocket. He looked at it for a moment. Then he leaned down and put it on the small fire, and stood watching until it had gone entirely to ash, and then he straightened up and said, "No, Julian, no, I will not ask you." His voice was not steady. "I let them do it. I have let them do a great many things in this house for 9 years, because it was easier, and because I told myself I was carrying something, and I have found out this week what that comes to. They may go to the devil, and I will tell them so tonight, and if my sister loses $90,000, then I will pay it out of the estate over 11 years, and we will live poor again, and it will be nothing worse than what I was born to." He stopped. "I have one thing to say, and then I will go. Verity, I did not marry you for the money. I let them arrange it for the money, which is worse, because it is the same act with a coward standing in it." And then he did go, and got as far as the door, and turned round, and asked her the only question that anybody in that house had asked her in 14 months, to which he did not already have the answer. "Why did you mend it?" Verity Ravensmere stood in the middle of her cold room and looked at her husband. "Come out to it," she said, "on the morning of the wedding, and bring your sister to the door." The Marquess of Ardennes came down on the 28th of May with his mother, his sister, and his solicitor. And it was the solicitor who ended it. Mr. Sandeman was about 45, a square, unhurried, unimpressible man from Lincoln's Inn with a leather case and no small talk whatever, and he had been sent by a family that had been buying land for 400 years, and had learned to do it slowly. He arrived at 2. By 4 he had asked 11 questions in the estate office, and had received 9 answers, and it was the 2 he did not receive that he wrote down. At 6 o'clock the whole party assembled in the saloon, the Duke, Lady Sibylle, Lady Georgiana Vane, the Marquess, his mother, the Dowager Marchioness, his sister, Mr. Kroll, Mr. Sandeman, and, because she had been sent for, and because she came at once, and because she had put on the plainest gown she owned, the Duchess of Ravensmere. There were 11 people in that room, and 4 servants at the doors, and every one of the 15 of them lived to be old, and not one of them ever forgot it. Mr. Sandeman did not sit down. He put his case on the table by the window, and opened it, and took out 3 papers, and he addressed himself to Mr. Kroll in a flat, pleasant voice that carried to every corner of the room. "Sir, I have 2 difficulties, and they are the same difficulty. The first is that the lady's portion is charged upon a trust with an express condition as to place, form, and record, and my clients will not sign articles upon a portion that cannot be paid. The second is that when I ask who is entitled to perform the condition, I am told by you that it is a form of words, and by the estate steward that the chapel is shut, and by an old man in the village whom I stopped on the road at 4 o'clock that the chapel has a new roof, a new wall, a new east window, and a new sexton, and that it has been in the sole hands of a lady these 14 months. He looked up. Gentlemen, I am too old to enjoy surprises. Who owns the chapel of St. Seine? Nobody answered him. The silence went on for 4 seconds, and then 5, and then 6, and it was the sort of silence that redistributes the standing of everybody in a room permanently. I do, said Verity Ravensmere. Mrs. Sandeman turned round and looked at her with the first flicker of interest he had shown since he came into the county. Your Grace holds it how? In fee simple, to my sole and separate use, free from the control, debts and engagements of my husband, by the settlement made on my marriage on the 11th of April 1834, drawn by Mr. Crowle. She said it as evenly as a woman reciting the stops of a coach road. With the chapel, the burying ground, the bell cote, the vestry, the chest, the registers, and 9 acres of glebe. Without reservation of any kind to the family, the estate, the tenants, or the parish. Without reservation, Mr. Sandeman repeated. They were offered the reservation, sir, and declined it, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, in the small library in my hearing. Mr. Crowle? Mr. Crowle, who had gone the colour of the paper in his own hand, said, in a voice with nothing left in it, "It is correct." And that was the moment at which Lady Sybil Ravensmere, who had held that house together for 9 years, and who had had 5 weeks of knowing, and who was 4 weeks from a wedding, with 1,100 roses ordered, and 160 people seated on a plan she had made 4 times, stood up out of her chair. "She has done it on purpose," she said. "Sybil," said the Duke, "she has done it on purpose. Look at her. Look at what she has been doing all year, every day, in all weathers, with her notebook and her little box of money. She has been building a wall round the one door my mother's will obliges me to walk through. And she has been doing it for 14 months, and she has never said one word." Her voice was going up, and there was nothing whatever wrong with her reasoning if you did not happen to know 11 facts that she did not know. She is going to make me ask. That is what this is. She is going to make me stand in front of the whole county at that gate and ask her, and then she is going to say no, and there is nothing any of us can do, because it is hers, because we gave it to her, because I gave it to her. She was breathing hard. Well, is that not so? Say it is not so, it is not so, said Verity Ravensmere. Then say what it is, I would rather show you, said Verity. May I have 4 minutes? It is upstairs. She went out. Nobody in the saloon said one word while she was gone. The Marquess of Ardennes, who was 35 and sandy-haired and had said almost nothing all evening, walked to the window and looked out at the park with his hands behind his back. Mr. Sandeman wrote something in his book. Lady Georgiana Vane sat perfectly still in crimson silk and understood, some minutes before anybody else in the room, that she was going to have to leave that house. The Duchess of Ravensmere came back with a book under her arm. It was a large book, bound plainly in dark green calf, about the size of a family Bible and rather thicker, with a strap and a small brass lock. She set it down on the long table in the middle of the room in front of them all, and unlocked it, and opened it, and turned it round to face Mr. Sandeman, and began to take them through it in the flat, unhurried, itemizing voice of a woman who had been trained at 11 years old to read a schedule aloud in a room full of men who did not want to hear it. 1, she said. The conveyance of the 11th of April, 1834, and the memorial of its enrollment at the county registry at Dorchester on the 3rd of June following, so that it cannot be lost, mislaid or mistaken by any clerk in England. She turned the page. 2. The certificate of the diocesan registrar at Salisbury, dated the 9th of July, 1834, that the chapel of St. Seine is consecrated ground and has never been deconsecrated. She turned the page. 3. The faculty for the repair of the fabric, granted the 11th of October, 1834, on my petition, with the surveyor's plan and elevations annexed, showing the works to the roof, the bell-cote, the east window, the north wall, and the burying ground. She turned the page. 4. The certificate of the surveyor, dated the 21st of March, 1835, that the works are complete and the fabric sound and fit for divine service. She turned the page. 5. The license for the solemnization of marriage in the said chapel, granted upon my application on the 11th of April this year, and lodged with the incumbent of the parish, who has been out to see the building and has agreed to serve it, and who is at this moment expecting to be asked. She turned the page. There was a sound in the room that was not speech. 6. The account. 491 days of paid labor to 19 men of this parish, with every name, every Saturday, and every sum, signed at the foot of every page in my hand, and the bills of the roofer, the lead worker, the mason, the carpenter, and the glazier, receipted, amounting in the whole to $11,430, paid out of my separate estate, no part of it charged to the entail, the mortgage, or my husband's credit. She turned the page. 7. The fair copy of the 11 registers of the chapel, from the year 1593 to this present, in my hand, attested by the incumbent and by the sexton's mark, made because the old books are perishing, and because the trust your clients are asking after Mr. Sandeman is a trust that turns on an entry in a register, and I did not intend that $90,000 should fail one day for a page eaten by damp. Mr. Sandeman put down his pen. Your Grace, he said, when was the last of these things done? The east window was finished on the 19th of March. The wall was closed on the 2nd of April. The license came on the 11th, and the wedding is the 24th of June. Yes, then may I ask you the question that nobody in this room has yet asked you, said Mr. Sandeman of Lincoln's Inn, and he asked it into a silence you could have stood a spoon in. For whom did you make it ready? Verity Ravensmere turned the green book round on the table so that it faced her sister-in-law. For her, she said. Lady Sybil Ravensmere did not move. I have known since the 1st of May last year, said Verity, what the ordinance says and what your mother's trust says, and what would happen to you in this room this month. I tried to tell you on the 9th of May at dinner, and you told me it was not becoming in me to be forever at the documents. I tried to tell Mr. Kroll 5 days later, and he told me it was a form of words, and asked whether I might not have something to gain by the difficulty. After that, I stopped trying to tell anybody, because my father wrote to me and said, they will not thank you. They will take it back from you, and the whole county will be told that the woman out of trade took her revenge on a family, in mourning for its own kindness. He was right. He is nearly always right. So I did not tell you. She put one hand flat on the green book. I roofed it instead. I have spent 14 months and $11,430 of my own money making sure that when this evening came, the thing you needed would exist, and would be sound, and would be licensed, and would be swept, and would have flowers in it, and would want nothing on earth from anybody, except one sentence spoken out loud at the door. "Verity," said the Duke of Ravensmere, and could not go on. "There is one more page," said Verity, "and then I have finished, and I should like to be excused, because I find I am not as composed as I have been pretending." She turned to the last page, 8, the register of the 14th of September, 1781. The marriage in that chapel of Charles, Lord Ravensmere, afterwards the 4th Duke, to Mary Halse, the daughter of a sailcloth maker of Lyme Regis. She looked up, and for the first time that evening her voice was not level. The leave was asked at the door, aloud, before witnesses. It was given at the door, aloud before witnesses. And it was given by the bride herself, because the chapel had been settled upon her that morning, at her marriage, as her own separate property. Mr. Kroll made a small sound. "There is a note at the foot of the page," said Verity, "written later, in the same hand, with a worse pen. I will read it to you. This chapel was given to me at my marriage because it was thought worth nothing, and because I came out of a sail loft, and I was told so at the table by his sister in the hearing of 11 persons. I have mended the roof of it. To her that comes after me and is given nothing, mend it. It is the only part of this house that cannot be sold, and it is the part they will one day need." Nobody in that room said anything for a long moment. "She is the 9th tomb," said Verity Ravensmere. "The one at the end, by the wall. Your great-grandmother Sybil. 54 years ago, in this house, at a table, somebody said to a girl out of Lyme exactly what was said to me on the 11th of April, and she was given exactly what I was given, for exactly the same reason, and she mended it, and she left a message in a register for whoever came after her, and no one in this family has opened that book since, so no one has read it. So it happened again." She closed the green book quietly. "I did not do this to you. It was done to her, and then it was done to me, and if nobody says it out loud in front of witnesses, it will be done to some other girl in this room's daughter in 50 years, and she will be told it is a form of words." Then she said, "Excuse me," and went out, and the door closed behind her. It was Mr. Sandeman who broke the silence, because lawyers are the only people who can be relied upon to speak in the 4 minutes after a thing like that, and because he had been shown, in the space of 11 minutes, the most completely prepared piece of work he had seen in 22 years at the bar of nobody's attention. "My lord," he said to the Marquis of Ardennes, "the condition can be performed. The building is sound, licensed and consecrated. The register is in order. The trustees will pay on the certificate, and I will draw the articles tonight." He fastened his case. "I will add, since I am not paid to say it, and may therefore say it, that in 22 years I have never seen a title better kept, and that if any one of you tells that lady she has behaved ill, you will do it after I have left the county." The Marquis of Ardennes walked away from the window. He was not a clever man, and he knew it, and he had spent his life being managed by cleverer people, and he had been in that saloon for an hour and a half, watching a woman lay a 14-month act of patience on a table 1 page at a time. "Sibyl," he said, "I should like to be married in the chapel." Lady Sybil Ravensmere stood in the middle of the saloon with the seating plan for 160 people still in her hand. "It holds 60, she said. Her voice was strange and small. "It holds 60 people, Edmund. I have 400 coming." "Then they may stand in the churchyard," said the Marquis of Ardennes, "on the grass, in June, with the wall mended and the bell going. It sounds better than the awning." And Lady Sybil put the plan down on the table and looked at the green book lying shut beside it, and said, to nobody in particular, in the flattened voice of a woman who has just understood the shape of the whole of the last 14 months and every one of her own evenings at dinner inside it, "I have to ask her." At the door, out loud, in front of all of them. "Yes," said her brother. "They will all hear it." "Yes," said the Duke of Ravensmere. "So will you." There were 27 days between that evening and the wedding, and they were the strangest 27 days in the history of that house. The awning was countermanded. The 1,100 forced roses from Bath were countermanded too, and Verity took the whole of the flowers out of the hands of the London people, and gave them to the village, which is to say she gave them to 11 women and about 30 children, who stripped every cottage garden and hedge in the parish for 4 days, and filled the chapel of St. Sain with white campion, dog rose, elder, cow parsley, foxglove, honeysuckle, and marguerite. And the smell of it on the morning was a thing that people in that parish were still describing to their grandchildren in the 1890s. The seating plan for 160 went into the fire. 60 chairs went into the chapel. Isaac Rowe and his men spent 9 days leveling and turfing the slope of the green bowl above the churchyard wall, so that 400 people could stand on it and see. And when the Marquess of Ardennes rode over to look at what they were doing, he got off his horse and helped carry turf for 2 hours and ruined a coat, which did him more good in that parish than anything else he did in his life. Lady Georgiana Vane left Ravensmere on the 11th of June. She went to a sister in Cheltenham, and she gave out that she was much needed there, and she was not asked to stay by anybody. She came to the East Room on the morning she went, in travelling dress, and stood in the doorway and said, "I hope you understand that I never meant anything unkind." "I understand exactly what you meant," said Verity Ravensmere, "and so do you, and I would rather neither of us pretended, because I am tired and I have a great deal to do. Goodbye, Lady Georgiana. I hope you will be happy." The Duchess's apartments were opened, aired and cleaned in 3 days. The Duke gave the order himself, and stood in the middle of the sitting room while they took the covers off, and looked down the lime avenue out of the south windows, and then went and found Mrs. Pettifer, and asked her, as a personal matter, what else in that house his wife had gone without for 14 months. Mrs. Pettifer, who had been waiting 1 year and 2 months to be asked that question by somebody, told him. It took 11 minutes, and he heard the whole of it standing up. Lady Sybil came out to the chapel alone on the evening of the 20th of June. She came on foot, over the hill, in a plain grey gown, without a maid, at about 8 o'clock, when the light lies long across that park and the swifts are working the top of the hill, and Verity, who was in the porch with the old register and a pen, marking the places where the damp had taken a word, looked up and saw her sister-in-law standing at the gate, and did not get up. Sybil came in and stood between the tombs. "It is very beautiful," she said at last. It is. I have not been inside it since I was 14 years old. She was looking at the east window, where the level sun was coming through 411 pieces of medieval glass and laying a pool of red and blue on the flagstones inside the door. My father brought us out for my grandmother's funeral, and I remember it raining through the roof onto the coffin. I remember thinking that somebody ought to do something about it, and I remember deciding it was not my business. And I was 14, so I suppose I may be forgiven 14. She stopped. I was not 14 on the 11th of April. Verity put down the pen. No, she said. You were not. I have tried for 4 weeks to find a way of saying this that does not make me ridiculous, and there is not one. So I shall be ridiculous. Lady Sybil Ravensmere stood very straight in the long light, with her hands closed in front of her. I said it because you had $80,000 and I had nothing, and because everything in that house that had been kept from falling down for 9 years had been kept by me, with nothing, in front of nobody, and because you walked into it in April with your quiet voice and your father's money, and I could not bear that the whole thing was going to be saved by somebody who had not had to do any of it, and because Georgiana was in the window, and because it made the room laugh, and I have got so used to making that room laugh, Verity. It is the only currency I have ever had in it. Her voice did not break quite. None of that is an excuse. It is only the account. You asked for the account of everything else, so you may as well have the account of that. There was a long silence in the churchyard. Thank you, said Verity Ravensmere. Is that all you are going to say? No, I am going to say 2 more things, and then I am going to give you some supper, because you have walked 1.5 miles, and there is bread and cheese in the vestry, and I am not going to have you faint on Wednesday. Verity stood up. The first is that I forgive you, and I want you to know that I did not 5 weeks ago, and that I have not arrived at it by being a good woman. I arrived at it by finding out that it was not personal. It was done to Mary Halse in 1781 by her husband's sister, and it was done to me in 1834 by mine, in the same room, for the same reason, in nearly the same words. And a thing that regular is not a person, Sybil. It is a machine, and I am not going to spend my life being angry at a machine when I can take it to pieces instead. And the second thing? The second thing, said Verity, is that on Wednesday you are going to have to ask me at the door, out loud, in front of 400 people. And I want you to understand before you do it that there is no possibility whatever that I will say no. None. I have had the license since April. Your name is already written in this register in pencil at the place where I shall write it in ink. And the pen is bought. And if you fall ill on Wednesday morning, I will hold the whole thing over until you are well. She held her sister-in-law's eyes. You have been lying awake for 4 weeks over that door. I have known that. I could have written to you, and I did not. And I want to say plainly that I did not because some part of me wanted you to lie awake. That is mine. And it is not lovely, and I am not going to pretend it away. But you may sleep tonight. It is a form of words, Sybil. It is the most serious form of words in the world, and I am going to say the good half of it. And Lady Sybil Ravensmere put both her hands over her face, and stood between the graves of 9 of her own people, and cried for about 1.5 minutes. And her brother's wife stood beside her with a hand on her shoulder, and let her, and said nothing at all, because there was nothing at all that needed saying, and then they went into the vestry, and had bread and cheese off the lid of the parish chest. The 24th of June, 1835, came up hot and blue, and without one cloud. They began coming out from the village at 7 in the morning. By 9:30 there were 400, and some people on the turfed slope above the churchyard, and about 100 more along the top of the new wall, and in the fork of the great sycamore, and the whole parish had put on whatever it had. The 19 men who had built the place were standing in a body at the gate with their wives, in clean shirts, and Isaac Rowe had shaved twice. Amos Broadmead had been up since 4. He had swept the porch and the path and the whole nave twice, and he had oiled the great key for the 11th time in 14 months, and at 9 o'clock he went up into the bell-cote and sat down beside the bell with his hat off, in the sun, like a man on the box of his own carriage, waiting. The 9 carriages came down the lime avenue at 11:15 with the sun on them, and turned out of the park gates, and came up the hollow way, and stopped at the low iron gate in the wall of the old deer park, and the crowd on the bank went absolutely silent, which 400 people are not able to do unless they have all been told the same story for 4 weeks by the same 19 men. The Duke of Ravensmere handed his sister down himself. She was in white, with her mother's veil, and she took her brother's arm at the gate, and they came up the path between the table tombs, past the 9th one at the end by the wall, where Mary Hulse of Lyme had been lying for 20 years with nobody reading her name. And the whole crowd on the bank leaned forward. And there, in the open doorway of the chapel, standing within, in a gown of grey silk with a plain white collar and one thin gold chain and no jewels whatever, was the Duchess of Ravensmere. Behind her, on a small table just inside the door, lay the register, open and a pen, and an inkstand. Lady Sybil Ravensmere let go of her brother's arm 3 paces from the door, and went the last 3 paces by herself, and stopped, and stood in front of a door that her family had owned for 200 years, and did not own any more. Then she asked, out loud, in a clear voice, in front of every soul in that county, I ask leave to enter this chapel, and to use the same for my marriage after the usage of this house. There are 11 separate written accounts of what happened in the next 30 seconds, because 11 people who were there wrote it down at the time or later, and they differ about the light and the birds and what the bride was wearing, and they do not differ about one word of this. It is given, said Verity Ravensmere. Freely and gladly, and before all these witnesses. Come in, Sybil, it has been ready since March. And she stood aside from her own doorway, and put out her hand, and drew her sister-in-law in over the threshold with it, and the noise that came off that bank of 400 people was not a cheer. At first it was a great low sound, the sound a crowd makes when a thing has been done properly in front of it. And it went on long enough that Amos Broadmead, up in the bell-cote with his hands on the rope, judged it and waited it out, and then let go, and the bell of St. Sain went off over the deer park for the first time in 19 years, and every jackdaw in the parish came up out of the trees. Inside the door, with the pen in her hand and the crowd still roaring behind them, Verity turned the old book round on the table. Before I write it, she said, read that. And Lady Sybil Ravensmere, in her mother's veil on her wedding morning, bent over the 9th page of the 6th register, and read 54 words written in a bad pen by a sailcloth maker's daughter, in the year 1781, and when she straightened up her face had entirely changed. and she looked round the small, crowded, flower-filled chapel with its clean window and its swept floor and its 60 chairs and its 400 people at the door, and she said, she mended the roof. And then they gave it away as a joke. Yes, and you knew that in April. Sybil was staring at her. You have known that since April, and you did not say it to me in front of Sandeman, or Georgiana, or Kroll, or one single person who would have enjoyed it. I said it to you last Saturday evening, said Verity, sitting on a chest, with bread and cheese, when there was nobody there but us. There is a way of telling people true things, Sybil, and it is not in front of an audience. She dipped the pen. Now stand still and let me write you down. Your husband is going grey at the chancel step. She wrote the entry in her own hand, in the register of the chapel of St. Seine, as the usage of the house required, the leave asked at the door, aloud, before witnesses, by the party seeking it, and given at the door aloud before witnesses by the owner of the chapel, and she signed it, Verity Ravensmere, owner of this chapel by settlement of the 11th of April, 1834, and the incumbent attested it, and Mr. Sandeman of Lincoln's Inn attested it, and Amos Broadmead came down out of the bell-cote, and made his mark under it, with the pen held in his fist like a chisel, and the certificate went to Bath by the mail that night, and old Mr. Fortescue paid $90,000 on the 2nd of July without a murmur. The marriage was at 11. 60 people were in the chapel, and 500 were on the grass, and the doors and the windows stood open, so that the whole of it was heard outside, which nobody had planned, and everybody afterwards claimed to have thought of. At the end of it, when they came out under the sycamore into the sun and the noise, the Duke of Ravensmere did not go down the path with the family. He turned round in the porch, in front of 400 people, and went back in, and came out again with his wife on his arm, and walked her down the path between the 9 tombs, and out at the gate, and up the hollow way at the head of the whole parish, past the 19 men who had built the wall, and he did not once let go of her hand, and at the bottom of the slope he stopped, and said something to her that nobody heard. There are 3 surviving accounts of what the Duchess of Ravensmere answered, and they are all different, and none of them is likely, and the one that everybody in that parish preferred for the next 60 years was Isaac Rose, who was standing nearest, and who always said, when he was asked, which was often, she said, mend the roof of the yellow bedroom, and we shall say no more about it. There is one thing that has been left out of that morning, and it belongs here, because it was the thing the parish talked about longest of all. Ambrose Lyle had come down from Bridport on the Monday, and had spent the 2 days before the wedding in the vestry with his coat off, ruling lines in the school subscription book, and refusing to be introduced to anybody. He was there in the porch when the register was signed. He had not meant to be. He had gone in to be out of the sun, and when Mr. Sandeman of Lincoln's Inn had attested the entry, and Amos Broadmead had made his mark under it, the Duchess of Ravensmere looked up from the table with the pen still in her hand, and said, into a porch full of people, we want one more witness. Father, will you sign? The old attorney stood quite still. Every person in that doorway knew what had been said in the small library on the 11th of April, 1834. Because the whole county knew it by then, it had gone round the market towns for 4 weeks with the roof and the wall and the garnets, and it had gone round in Lady Sybil's own words, because Lady Sybil had repeated them herself. Twice, to her husband's mother, and to the incumbent, at a cost to her pride that nobody but Verity ever properly weighed. Give her Saint Sain. It will give her somewhere to put her father's name. Ambrose Lyle came forward, and took the pen, and wrote in the round, clear hand of a man who had copied deeds for 51 years, his name and his edition Ambrose Lyle, attorney at law of Bridport, in the county of Dorset. And under it, because his daughter had turned the book an inch towards him and said one word, he wrote the second line, "Father of the owner of this chapel." Then he gave her back the pen, and blew on the ink, and said, "Well," and went out into the churchyard, and stood among the tombs with his back to everybody for a little while. And Isaac Rowe's wife took him a glass of cider, and had the sense to say nothing at all. The breakfast was in the long gallery at 2:30, for 160 people, in a room that had been repainted for the purpose at very great expense, and that smelled faintly of it all afternoon. The Duke of Ravensmere spoke first and badly, as bridegroom's brothers-in-law generally do, and sat down after 90 seconds to a great deal of kindness. The Marquess of Ardennes spoke second, and was brief, and said the only thing that stayed in anybody's memory, which was that he had come into Dorset in May, expecting to be married to a fortune in a fashionable church, and was going home in June, married to a woman he had watched cry in a chapel doorway over 54 words written by a sailcloth maker's daughter, and that he considered he had had the better end of the bargain and did not wish to hear any argument about it. And then Lady Sybil, Marchioness of Ardennes, stood up in her mother's veil in front of 160 people, which no bride in that county had done in living memory, and waited until the room had got over the shock of it, and said, "I am going to do a thing badly, and I am going to do it anyway." 14 months ago, at this house, at a table like this one, in front of my brother and my father's lawyer, and a friend of mine and 2 servants, I said something to my brother's wife that I would give the whole of my mother's portion to have back. I am not going to repeat it. Half of you know it, and the half of you who know it have told the other half by now, and I am aware exactly how well I come out of it. There was not a sound in the long gallery. I gave her a ruin because I thought it was worth nothing, and I told her she might put her father's name in it. She has spent 14 months and $11,400 of her own money mending the thing I threw at her. She held my wedding in it this morning. And an hour ago she asked her father to sign my marriage as a witness, in front of the whole parish, and turned the book so that he could. Lady Sybil's voice went, and she waited and took it back. His name is in the register of my family's chapel now, on the same page as mine, for as long as that book lasts. I am asking every one of you to stand up, and I do not much mind what you drink to. She has been called the Duchess's ruin in this house for a year. Call her what she is. 160 people got up off their chairs in the long gallery at Ravensmere on the 24th of June, 1835, and drank to the Duchess of Ravensmere, and it was reported in 2 Bristol papers and 1 London one, and the phrase that all 3 of them used, because it was the phrase that came up out of the middle of that room from somebody nobody ever identified, was the one the parish had been using since March: the woman who mended the roof. The county talked about it for 11 years. It talked at first in the way counties do, which is to say wrongly. For about a fortnight the story that went round the dinner tables was that the new Duchess of Ravensmere had held her sister-in-law's wedding to ransom, and had been bought off at the church door, and Verity heard that version repeated to her face at a dinner at Lady Marchbank's on the 9th of July by a woman who thought she was being sympathetic. It died because of the 19 men. That is the part of it that the family never entirely understood, and that Ambrose Lyle, when his daughter wrote to him about it, understood in 4 seconds from 111 miles away. A story about a great house can be put down by the great house's own servants, and nobody outside will ever hear it. A story that has been paid for in coin every Saturday at noon for 14 months by a woman with a ruled book, into the hands of 19 men with 400 relations between them in 3 parishes, cannot be put down by anybody at all. It was not that they defended her. It was that they knew, in flat detail, what the roof had cost and who had paid for it, and what she had sold to buy the window, and they said so in market towns for 30 miles, and by August the version that had reached Dorchester was the true one, and had, if anything, improved. Mr. Kroll retired at Michaelmas. He was 71, and he wrote a letter of 11 lines to the Duke asking leave to give up the family's business, and he did not offer any reason, and none was asked. What is less generally known is that he came out to the chapel first, alone, on a wet afternoon in September, and found the Duchess in the vestry with the parish accounts, and stood in the doorway with his hat in his hands, an old thin man in a black coat with the rain running off him. "I have come to say that I wrote it clean," he said. "I know, Misty Kroll. I have drawn conveyances for 49 years, Your Grace, and I have never in my life left a reservation out of one, because a lady by a fire told me it did not signify. He was not looking at her. And I told you it was a form of words. You brought it to me in this hand, on a half-sheet, and I folded it up and gave it back to you, and I said no court in England would let a young lady's fortune fail for a heap of stones with jackdaws in it. You did. I have thought about it every day since the 19th of May, said Mr. Kroll. I am not going to ask you to say it was nothing, because it was not nothing, and you are the only person in this business who has never once said a thing she did not mean. He put his hat on. I have made a memorandum for whoever comes after me, setting out the ordinance, the usage, the trust, and the conveyance, and I have had it copied 3 times and lodged in 3 places, so that it cannot happen again for want of anybody knowing. That is all I can do at 71. Good day, Your Grace. Mr. Kroll, he stopped in the doorway. Come to the harvest supper, said Verity. It is in the churchyard on the 11th. Isaac Rowe's wife does the cider, and there will be 140 people, and nobody will say one word about any of this to you, because I shall have told them not to. The old man stood in the rain for a moment, with his back to her. Thank you, he said, and went away up the hollow way, and came to the harvest supper, and came to every harvest supper for 6 years until he died, and left the whole of his savings, which were $4,060, to the school in the vestry. The school in the vestry began in the November of that year, with 9 children and a slate. It was Verity's, and it was paid for out of Verity's separate money to the end of her life, and it ran on the principle, which scandalized 2 neighboring parishes, and was written up in a Bristol newspaper in 1841, that the children of the men who had built the place should be taught to read the accounts of it. By 1840 it had 41 children, a paid master, and a second room built onto the north side by Isaac Rowe, who charged for the stone and not for the labor, and could not be argued out of it. Amos Broadmead was sexton of St. Sain for 9 more years. He rang the bell on the 24th of June every year for the rest of his life, whatever else was happening, and he taught 11 boys to ring it, and he kept the path swept, and he learned to read at the age of 72 in the vestry school with the 9 children, badly and slowly and with enormous difficulty, for one stated purpose, which he announced to the Duchess on the day he began, and never varied from. I mean to read the 11 books, mistress, all of them. I have had the key of that chest since the year 89, and I have never known what was in it, and it is not right. He got as far as the 4th register. The Duke of Ravensmere, in the autumn of 1835, began to court his own wife, which is a thing that happens more often in this world than the poets admit, and generally makes a better job of it than the other order. He did it badly at first, because he had no practice, and because a man who has been polite to somebody for 14 months has to get through the politeness before he can get anywhere, and politeness is a thicker wall than dislike. He asked her to walk with him. He asked her opinion on the drainage of the water meadows, and then, having got it, and having discovered that she had read the whole of a treatise on the subject in his own library that he had never opened, he asked her opinion on the mortgage, and the leases, and the timber, and by Christmas he had stopped asking her opinion and started asking her to be there when the agent came, which is different, and which the agent noticed at once. In the January of 1836, he did the thing that Verity, in her old age, always said was the moment. He came into the estate office where she was working, and put a sheet of paper on the table in front of her, and said, "I want you to read this, and tell me what is wrong with it before I sign it, and if there is nothing wrong with it, say so, and if there is, say that, and do not soften it, because I have had 15 years of people softening things for me, and it has cost this family $111,000. She read it. It was a lease of the home farm for 21 years. The covenant to repair is the tenant's, she said, and the covenant to insure is yours. And the rent review is at year 14 only, and hemp and rope are accepted out of the tenant's right to grow, which I imagine is Mr. Kroll's successor being tactful about my father. Strike the exception. It is an insult, and it is worth $400 a year to whoever takes it." The Duke of Ravensmere sat down on the edge of the table and began to laugh, for the first time in that house since his father died, and he laughed until he had to take his handkerchief out, and then he said, "They gave you a chapel." "They did. They had you in their house for a year, with the whole of this in front of you, and they gave you 9 acres and a ruin and told you not to be forever at the documents." He wiped his eyes. "Verity, I am the greatest fool in the west of England, and I have 4,000 acres to prove it. Will you take the estate?" "No," said Verity Ravensmere. "No? I will take half of it, and you will take the other half, and we will sit down together on the first Monday of every month, with both sets of books open, and the agent in the room. And you will learn it, Julian, because you are not stupid. You have only been frightened for 9 years, and there is a difference, and every servant in this house knows it, and every one of them will tell you so if you ever ask them anything." She put the lease down. "I did not marry a fortune, and I do not want an estate," I want a husband who is not afraid of his own rent roll. Strike the hemp exception, and we will begin on Monday. They began on Monday. The mortgage was cleared in 1839, 4 years earlier than her father's estimate, chiefly by timber, drainage, and the ending of 11 separate small dishonesties that nobody had looked at closely enough to find. The North Range was re-leaded in 1841, the yellow bedroom in 1836, and the long gallery, which had been repainted for a wedding breakfast that never happened in it, held the harvest supper every 11th of September for 30 years when the weather was wrong for the churchyard. Lady Sybil, Marchioness of Ardennes, wrote to her sister-in-law every fortnight for 26 years. The first letter came from Ardennes in the July of 1835, and it was 2 lines long, and Verity kept it in the Green Book until she died. My dear Verity, I have told my husband's mother the whole of it, including my own part, which took some doing, and she says that I have married better than I deserve, and that she means the connection and not her son. S.A. She came back for the harvest supper every year. She sat on the churchyard wall with the cider and the mason's wife and the school children, and became, in the course of about 4 years, the funniest woman in that parish, which nobody who had sat at the Ravensmere dinner table in 1834 would have believed possible, and in 1844, when the Duchess was ill for 11 weeks, with a fever after a bad winter. It was Sybil who came and ran the house and the school and the accounts, and sat up at night with her, and would not go home until she was walking again. Lady Georgiana Vane married, in 1838, a wine merchant of Bristol with 11,000 a year, and was, by all accounts, perfectly comfortable, and never came to Ravensmere again, and sent a christening cup in 1837 with a card, and the cup was used and the card was kept, and nobody in that family ever said one unkind word about her out loud in front of a servant, which was a rule of the house from 1835 and was Verity's, and was kept. And the chapel of St. Seine, having been given to a woman because it was thought to be worth nothing, became, over the following 40 years, the exact center of that parish. Their daughter was born in the March of 1837 and christened at St. Seine on the 19th of April, with the whole parish in the churchyard and the school children singing badly at the door, and she was called Mary. The Duke chose the name. He came into his wife's room on the second morning and stood looking down at the child for a while and said, "Mary, if you will allow it, not for my great-grandmother's sake, or not only, for the woman who wrote at the bottom of the page with a bad pen and no witness and did it anyway, on the chance that somebody would read it in 50 years. He put his finger into the baby's fist. Somebody did read it. It seems to me that ought to be marked. Verity Ravensmere, who had not cried at the settlement or at the dinner table or at the door in front of 400 people, cried at that, and always said afterwards that it was the tiredness, and was never believed by anybody. Amos Broadmead died in the January of 1844, at 79 years of age, in the cottage he had lived in rent-free for 9 years, with the 4th register of the Chapel of St. Seine on the table beside the bed, opened at a page he had got about 2/3 of the way through. He was buried in the churchyard he had swept for 55 years, and he was buried at the end of the row, 10th in the line of the 9 table tombs of the house of Ravensmere, which had never in 200 years admitted anybody who is not of the blood. That was the Duke's doing. He gave the order himself, in front of the agent and the incumbent and 2 footmen, in the exact words that were afterwards cut on the stone at his wife's direction, and which anybody may still read there. He kept the key for 55 years, and he was never once asked for it. The Duchess of Ravensmere made her will in the spring of 1846, and it is a short one, and there is only one clause in it that anybody has ever been interested in. She devised the chapel of St. Sain, the burying ground, the bell, the bellcote, the vestry, the chest, the registers, and the 9 acres of glebe to her daughter Mary, and to the eldest daughter of that daughter after her, and so on for ever in the female line in fee simple, to her sole and separate use, free from the control, debts and engagements of any husband, and she declared, in words she wrote herself, and which her father's successor could not persuade her to shorten, that it was her express wish that the owner of the chapel should never at any time be a person to whom the house of Ravensmere could give an order. And she wrote one more thing, and this is the last of it. She had the 11 old registers rebound in 1847, and her own fair copy bound with them, and into the front of each of the 12 books she had bound a single leaf, on which was written out, in her own hand twice, the memorandum of the 14th of September, 1781, made by Mary House of Lyme Regis, sailcloth maker's daughter, with the note at the foot of it in the bad pen. And under it, on the same leaf, she wrote this, Read by me, Verity Duchess of Ravensmere, on the 3rd of April, 1835, in the 14th month of my marriage, alone, in this chapel 54 years after it was written, and I am the woman it was written to. It was done to her, and it was done to me. I have set it in the front of all 12 books, so that the next one may find it in 11 minutes instead of 11 months, and so that no lady of this house need ever again discover by accident what she is standing on. To her that comes after me, and is given nothing, they will hand you the thing they think is worthless, and they will laugh in front of you while they do it, and they will not write down any reservation, because they will not believe there is anything there to reserve. Take it. Take it in fee simple, and in your own name, and get it enrolled, and then go and look at it in your stout boots with a notebook, and find out what it is, and do not tell them. Mend it with your own money, and keep every bill, and pay the men in coin on a Saturday, out of your own hand, and learn their 19 names, and read the old books, all of them, to the end. Because everything that has ever happened in a family is written down somewhere by somebody who was not listened to at the time. And on the day they come to you in a fright, with their wedding ordered and their roses bought and their 400 people standing on the grass, do not lock the door on them. Anybody can lock a door. It takes nothing, it lasts one morning, and it makes you the smallest person present. Open it. Open it wide, and stand within, and give the leave out loud, so that every soul in the county hears you give it, and then write their name in the book in your own hand. That is the whole of it. That is what the door is for, and it is why it is written over the arch and not over the gate. The door is opened from within. Verity, Duchess of Ravensmere. Her hand, the 11th of April, 1847, being the 13th anniversary of the day, They gave me 9 acres and 9 graves. She lived another 34 years. She saw the mortgage cleared, and the North Range releaded, and the school grow to 61 children and 2 masters, and she saw her daughter married at St. Seine in 1859, at a wedding at which the bride's own mother stood within the door and was asked out loud for the leave, and gave it, and wept doing it. And she saw her husband, who had been so much afraid at 31 and was not afraid at 50, become the sort of landlord whose tenants came to his funeral from 4 counties. She died in the winter of 1881, in her 70th year, and she was carried out to the Green Bowl in the old deer park by 8 men, 4 of them the sons of masons and carpenters, who had roofed the place in 1834, and the bell that had hung silent for 19 years was rung for her by 3 men she had paid to teach. She lies 11th in the row, not with the dukes at the top, where a duchess is put, at the far end by the wall, next to Mary Halse of Lyme on one side and Amos Broadmead the sexton on the other, in the place she chose herself in 1846, and wrote into her will twice, in case anybody tried to be grand about it after she was past arguing. There is no title on the stone. She would not have it. There are 2 lines only, and the first is the date, and the second is 4 words long, and it is the answer she gave at a door on the 24th of June, 1835, in front of 400 people, to a woman who had once said in her hearing that 9 acres and 9 graves were quite as much as anybody could reasonably have expected her to want. It is given. Come in.